I'm going to go very quickly over a quick review about the square meal report and how it came about and what it actually says. So it was launched in the summer of 2014, and it was a coalition of 9 organisations covering kind of policy areas like mine, RSPB and environment, or food, such as the Food Ethics Council, and Sustain, or public health, like the food research collaboration based out of City University in London. The main aim of the report was to start a conversation, was to change the narrative about how we talk about food and farming in the country. And that was underlaid by 3 key messages. 1, that there is overwhelming evidence for a need for change. 2, that we need much clearer leadership from above in managing and planning for the food and farming in the country. And 3, we need to address the system in a much more holistic manner. We need to be linking the 4 sides of the square meal, which are public health, food, farming and the natural environment. So I'll just throw out a few stats that we used in the initial report just to kind of underlay why there is such a need for change. Currently 33% of under 18s in the UK are overweight or obese. I just add to that after the sessions today about education, there was also a report released last year that says that 3 out of 4 children at the minute don't actually have regular access to good quality green space. Additionally, there were over 900,000 incidents of people being provided with 3 days emergency food in the year up to March 14. 75% of protein fed to our livestock in the EU is imported, and we have lost over 44 million pairs of breeding birds in the last 50 years. So there were some of the facts we were using and why the square meal is calling for a change in the food and farming system. Although it's getting a bit of coverage, we're finding that we're not getting much traction with this message at a national level with national governments. And what we've been told is that where the kind of best thinking is going on in the country at the minute, where the most innovative thinking is going on, is at a local level. That's where the best schemes are taking place. That's where best practice is being shown. And I also said earlier that actually over the next few years we're going to be seeing a massive move in devolution of powers across the country, from Westminster, from Whitehall to local communities, in things like the Northern Powerhouse, in things like combined authorities and devolution bids currently being put forward. So I think this conversation is absolutely right to be taking place at a local level, and it's where the conversation needs to be taking place. Me and Rob are going to talk briefly tonight about some of the national recommendations that we've made already and how we can start to move these into a more local level. So I'll just hand over to Rob for his first session.
So I'm Rob Percival. I'm the Policy Officer for Food and Health at the Soil Association, one of the organisations behind the Square Meal report. As Paul said, Square Meal is calling for national leadership and a joined-up approach to food and farming policy. The challenges we face across food, farming, wildlife and health really demand a national response. We cannot tackle this agenda without proper government leadership. But we're failing to see that, as Paul said, on various of the issues. So we're looking tonight at this dynamic, at the relationship between the local and the national. And in order to pick this apart a little bit, I just want to look at one area of the Square Meal report where we're not seeing any action from government, or we're not seeing the action we want from government. This is the challenge of how to change behaviours. How do we change the way we eat so that it's more sustainable? How do we facilitate behaviour change on a national level in favour of more sustainable diets? And the flip side of this, of course, is that if we eat more sustainably, we're supporting more sustainable producers. The case for change on this point is urgent and well defined. There's 2/3 of the adults across the UK who are overweight or obese, and we tend to overeat food that has a detrimental impact on the environment, particularly meat. The evidence on this point is really strong. Eating a healthier and more sustainable diet requires that we eat more fresh fruit and veg and less meat, and we eat meat that has been produced in ways that protect animal welfare and protect our natural assets. So Square Meal is calling for national action on this point. We want to see government update official dietary guidance, the Eat Well plate, so that it takes account not only of health concerns, as it does at the moment, but so that sustainability issues are integrated into it. This action would be significant in that it would ensure that health professionals, educators, food businesses, and people nationally had really clear guidance on what constituted a sustainable and healthy diet. But the government's not leading on this. It's in local areas that we're seeing forward-thinking action that directly or implicitly supports this agenda. It's in local areas that people are being supported to eat differently and produce differently. And this action is coming from local authorities, from local businesses, from local farmers and growers, and from local communities. So if we consider the role of local authorities for a moment, local authorities and NHS trusts are responsible for the food served in a range of public settings, in hospitals, care homes, nurseries, schools and leisure centres. These settings are hugely influential. They can set the tone for the dietary norms that people find. They're prevalent enough in people's everyday lives to frame their daily food choices. Local authorities spend millions of pounds on food and catering services each year, and this money can be spent in promoting sustainable diets and sustainable producers. Brighton and Hove City Council is one council that's taken action by setting minimum buying standards for all catering contracts. The standards they've set are based on the Food for Life catering mark standards. These are the standards, a soil association scheme, assurance scheme that food providers can use to demonstrate that they're serving freshly prepared, seasonal produce that includes higher welfare meat, and that they're taking steps to reduce the meat on the menu as well. Excuse me. Evaluation of menus certified to this standard have found that they can promote fresh fruit and vegetable consumption, they can reduce the climate impact, and they can bring a social return of investment in the form of new jobs for local businesses and so on. Good food procurement by local authorities can shift local eating habits. It can increase the demand for local sustainable food while also helping to create some of the supply infrastructure to support the local food economy. When it comes to promoting sustainable consumption, local authorities can take the lead. And local action on this agenda isn't restricted to local government. The Sustainable Food Cities movement, which we'll be hearing more about from Sarah later, involves developing cross-sector partnerships of local public agencies, businesses, community groups, farmers and growers, and so on, who are working together to make healthy and sustainable food a defining characteristic of where they live. There are now 40 such cities across the UK. These cities are working to promote healthy and sustainable food, to promote the consumption of fresh, seasonal, local and organic produce. They're championing food initiatives that redistribute surplus food to those who need it. They're encouraging schools to take children to farms and undertake family-inclusive cooking and growing activities. We don't have time to go into all the detail here, and we'll hear more from Sarah later. But the point is that forward-thinking local action on this agenda is taking place across the country. That doesn't change the need for national action, but it does change the context, perhaps, in which national decisions are made. Local action can drive the square meal agenda forward, and perhaps if we get enough of a joined-up approach across local areas, we can even influence the national policy context. So at this point, I'll hand back over to Paul.
Thanks. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the kind of the farming and nature side of square meal. One of the most immediate national asks, and what we're saying is the key one at the minute, is that DEFRA are developing a 25-year plan for biodiversity and a 25-year plan for the future of food and farming in England. And as far as we can see, there is absolutely no links between these two plans. They refer to each other, but the objectives, the aims, none of it is referenced like that. None of it is working to a shared outcome. I think it's a really handy reminder that we're sitting in this room and we're kind of working on education and health and biz, and the Environment Minister and the Farming Minister are all going to be working together for these shared outcomes. And in reality, we can't even get two teams within DEFRA to work together properly. So it's a nice reality check of how far we've got to go on these issues. So DEFRA are consulting on both of these plans currently. They're doing it locally across the country. They're doing regional meetings, and I think one major thing for us is that they need to be hearing at a local level that the future of the environment in this country and the future of food and farming are fundamentally linked, and that planning for one you cannot do without the other, so that the messages they need to start hearing is that these two plans need to be much more joined up. So I would encourage anyone, if you can look at the consultation for these two plans, to kind of look into it and feed in, whether that be via local groups, local organisations, or just as yourself. I think that's really important. Secondly, we released about farm and birds, and both the organisations have demonstration farms that we use to kind of manage wildlife, and we've both found the exact same thing on the farms, that with very, very small changes you can massively increase the number of farm and birds and stop the declines that are happening all over the country. Very small steps that needed to be taken was basically providing spaces for birds to nest and making sure that there is summer food and winter food. And we found that with those three things you can double or even triple bird numbers within 5 to 10 years. So we did a joint press release on that. And part of that is making those little changes as easy as possible for farmers. And the best way to do that through is agri-environment schemes, which are paid for by the Common Agriculture Policy from Europe. They have gone through a change in the last few years, and what are now countryside stewardship schemes. I'm sure a lot of you already know all this in the room, but unfortunately what we're seeing is that there's been a slow uptake of these new schemes. We believe it's not because of the schemes themselves that farmers are really happy with what's in the schemes, but the onus placed on farmers, the kind of bureaucracy that they have to jump through to actually kind of apply for these schemes and to prove that they're doing them is just a bit too difficult, which is why there's been slow uptake. So as the RSPB and many organisations have been doing, is getting into local areas, working with farmers to try and improve as much uptake as possible. And what we need to be doing is finding those farmers that do best practice and, shouting it from the rooftops, getting networks in place to make sure that, they are recognised for the good work that they do for farm and birds, but also the multitude of benefits that kind of managing your farm in a nature-friendly way can provide, things like water management, kind of carbon storage, pollinator numbers. So I think as well what we need to be doing at a very local level is making sure that these kind of best practices are shared. We're getting these networks together, and we're really celebrating the farmers that are doing a good job and making sure that these countryside stewardship schemes are taken up and demand improves for it. I will now hand over to Rob, who will close up.
Our vision with Square Meal is for a really truly progressive UK food and farming sector that can thrive and provide much needed employment, that can help to restore and enhance nature. This would provide all citizens with affordable, healthy and environmentally sustainable food produced to improve standards of animal welfare, and would make certain that our farmers and food sector workers are treated fairly and properly rewarded. Increasing numbers of people from across the UK agree that it's possible for the UK to create a better food and farming system. But this requires national action, it requires government leadership, it requires a joined-up vision of what our food and farming system could be. The challenges that Paul and I have outlined cannot be tackled without proper government leadership. But, as I've already said, perhaps we need local action to drive that forward. Perhaps we need local examples before we can get the government to really take notice. So the challenge for you here in Dorset and elsewhere is how can you join up local food activism, grassroots food projects and local health and wellbeing priorities around this agenda? How can you make sure that your local government is using all the policy levers at their disposal to propel this agenda forward? Here in Dorset, your natural assets, your demography, your schools and hospitals and local food groups can all be looking for greater alignment around this common cause. These interconnected issues demand effective partnerships, collaboration, but also political will and leadership. The challenge for you locally is to pursue the actions that we've identified today and to join them up, to identify the beneficiaries who are not in this room who could also engage with this project. I scrolled down earlier some of the highlights that came out of the discussion groups. So as we've already heard, there was a lot of talk of education. Education as to the value of wildlife, food growing and cooking in schools. We also heard about the need for effective planning for public health, engaging the local enterprise partnership. We heard about health education and leading by example. We heard about connecting children to landscapes and getting youth involved in farming. So again, a real emphasis on young people in Dorset. And we heard about the need to take a strategic whole system approach to make sure that consistently across Dorset, children and young people are able to access and afford healthy and sustainable food, whoever and wherever they are. Square Meal set out to start a conversation. We don't come here today with all the answers. We come here today to join you in the conversation and to help raise the profile of the debate. So thank you very much for inviting us to be here, and we look forward to discussing this with you this evening.